feel free to turn off your videos. Thanks everyone for coming tonight. It is the first of 4 trainings on how to advocate with us as part of the Fairfax County Canopy Coalition. And we are really excited that you joined us tonight. And once a month through January. I can't believe we're even talking about January already. Just so we have some context setting about where tonight fits in with the rest of the training. Tonight we're going to be doing a little bit of an introduction of trees and the climate crisis kind of 101. And we realize that some of the information that we're covering tonight might already be familiar to some of you, or different aspects might be familiar, but we're hoping that it's good to have a common base to work from for this advocacy work. So we'll also have a reference document that we'll share in the chat box, a PDF. And we'll also email that around afterwards, but that's going to be your reference for all of the various things we're talking about tonight. Hopefully we captured everything in there. That way you can refer back to things or dive a little bit deeper. So the next 3 trainings that we have coming up, they'll be diving a bit more into the weeds of the actual advocacy work. So in November, we'll do an Advocacy 101 with Citizens Climate Lobby. That's going to be more of a meeting one-on-one with decision makers. Then we'll talk about how to write comment letters and how to be persuasive in your writing. And then we'll actually, last in January, talk about going and testifying in person in Fairfax County if you've not done that before. So first, I wanted to get a sense of everyone who's in the room. We have a little bit of a sense who's in the room. But first, I wanted to know if you live in Fairfax County, which this training is going to be focused on, go ahead and put in which district you live in. If you don't know that, Christine's going to drop in the chat box a link where you can put in your address and it will tell you which district you live in. And that'll be helpful because as you think about who you're going to be advocating to, you'll need to know who your representatives are. And so also in the registration, we asked a couple of questions to kind of gauge what's your comfort level with advocacy and also on communicating the value of trees. And I thought this information was really interesting. We had about a 50-50 split almost on beginners and intermediate in advocacy. And we ended up having that same split in communicating the value of trees, but it was not that the same people answered the same way. It was a whole mix. So it was really interesting. Some people felt more of a beginner, but maybe a bit more intermediate about talking about trees. So that was really, really interesting to see that split. So either way, we're really happy to have you here tonight. I'll say this before we dive in. A number of years ago, before I worked for Nature Forward, local advocate and one of my dear mentors, Kathy Ledeck, she urged me to get involved in testifying and speaking up at a public hearing. I don't even remember what it was, but I remember very clearly my visceral and actual reaction to her was, no way. There was no way I was expert enough or knowledgeable enough to do any of that. I didn't know how to sign up. I didn't know where to go to testify. I just didn't want to do it. But now I look back on that day, remembering that fear, very real. And I know that you don't need to be an expert, and that, you know, these trainings are formed to help you be able to get over that no way barrier that you might also have, because we really need all of our voices at the table to advocate for trees and for natural resources and good policies to help support those. So today, as our first session, we're going to be talking about the value of trees and addressing the climate crisis. I'm Renee Grebe. I'm the Northern Virginia Conservation Advocate for Nature Forward, and a core part of my job is to lead efforts in Northern Virginia focused most often in Fairfax County, where I live. I'm in the Franconia district, and we look to protect watersheds and respond to the climate emergency. And I started leading invasive plant removal work days with the Park Authority in 2012 just for fun. And then I realized I could get credit for it as a master naturalist. So I did that in 2014. I serve today on the Fairfax County Environmental Quality Advisory Council, which advises the Board of Supervisors on environmental issues. I've been on that since 2016, and I write the Parks and Ecological Resources chapter of our annual report. And I've done advocacy personally and my own HOA. I've installed rain gardens and larger scale tree plantings, which ended up winning a Friends of Trees Award from the Fairfax County Tree Commission. And with that, I've worked at Nature Forward since 2019. And with that, I hand it over to Cindy.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Cindy Spies. I'm the advocacy lead for Providence District and the tree issue lead for Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions, or FACS, we say in short form. In 2019, I became a climate reality leader trained by Al Gore. In 2021, Chairman Jeff McKay appointed me to the at-large seat on the Fairfax County Tree Commission, where I now serve as chair. And in 2022, like Renee, not in that year though, I completed the Fairfax Master Naturalist training. I served on the Countywide Energy and Climate Action Plan, or CCAP, on that working group, and on the Community Advisory Group of Resilient Fairfax. Also a tree rescuer, but with Plant Nova Trees, I help remove invasive vines from trees and write for the Plant Nova Trees blog. I'd also like to introduce you to FAX's Christine Montanesi, who will monitor the chat and moderate our Q&A. And if you have any technical difficulties, you can send her a private message via the chat. Thanks, Christine. So for tonight's agenda, I'd like to start with the benefits of trees, move on to how trees are threatened here in the county, and Renee will finish with what we can do to advocate for trees when talking with decision makers. The list of benefits that native trees provide us is pretty extensive, but can be basically grouped into climate mitigation benefits, economic benefits, health benefits, and ecosystem and other environmental benefits. So we're going to review these to see why both residents and our local decision makers should care about trees. First, let's talk trees and climate. How are they related? Well, this graphic shows how trees are key in several cycles: the water cycle, the nitrogen cycle, and the carbon cycle. All forests of trees absorb and fix carbon in both the tree structure, so its roots and leaves and the surrounding soil. This is called sequestration. Trees also respire oxygen and water to help keep the air clean, reduce drought conditions, and remove pollution from the air. Because trees are larger than other plants, their contribution to climate mitigation is very important. Here's a graphic that visualizes how much biomass can be available to sequester carbon as opposed to the small impermeable footprint of the barn. And the more impermeable buildings there are, the less chance there is that carbon can be sequestered. The climate crisis is centered on how human consumption of carbon or fossil fuels has increased the greenhouse gas emissions, short form GHGs. You'll hear that all the time. So that's greenhouse gas emissions, which are warming the planet. But how can we visualize the effects of something we can't see? Well, one way is to think of how one average tree captures about 0.62 metric tons of carbon dioxide in its lifetime. That equals the carbon emissions of driving one car powered by fossil fuel for about 1,500 miles. And this is temporary storage in one tree. If that tree is removed by some threat, land development, fire, drought, or pests, it releases into the atmosphere all the carbon it has stored over the years of its life. Now let's talk about trees and stormwater runoff. According to the EPA's Chesapeake Bay program, Virginia loses slightly more than 47,000 acres of trees annually to development, disease, and storms. This loss of mature trees, particularly in urban and suburban localities where we live, hinders Virginia's total efforts to manage stormwater into the bay. Why? Well, mature tree canopies intercept and hold in their crowns up to 20% of annual rainfall, slowing down both the volume and the rate of stormwater runoff, which can help to reduce flooding. A helpful environmental side effect of this is that tree roots filter fertilizer and other bad additives, the salt that runs off from our streets and that kind of thing, preventing these from causing harm to our bodies of water that we live near. Trees also help to improve soils, allowing rain to soak into the ground and recharge groundwater supplies. So the nice side effect of trees mitigating climate change. Well, what does this look like? Looking at the side-by-side examples of impermeable infrastructure. This shows that, looking at the left and the right, that as tree canopy and natural ground cover decreases and impermeable surface increases, the amount of evaporation and filtration of water goes down, and the amount of runoff goes way up. The right graphic shows, although it's hard to see where the number is, it shows that in that urbanized area, more than half of the water that falls on the ground in a rainstorm can end up rushing off our streets and roofs and into our streams. This can result in urban flash flooding and damaging impacts to our waterways. Scientists have measured carefully the economic benefits of trees. Trees can lower energy or utility costs as much as 50% annually. Property values can increase by as much as 37%. Businesses near trees can see as much as a 12% increase in sales. Gray infrastructure, that is what's made from concrete and asphalt, if it's shaded, it does not degrade as quickly as it does if it's in full sun. So all of these economic benefits can provide incentives for new businesses and other entities to move to Fairfax County. So how do trees improve human health? So here's a new word, if you haven't heard it, or a new acronym. PM2s are particulate matter air pollutants. And they're usually emitted from cars or industry. And we're mostly around car transportation in our area, but there is some industry. Where PM2s, however, are filtered and captured by nearby trees, childhood asthma goes down as much as 25%. There's a lot of interesting data on how shaded trees can reduce crime as much as 52%. Casey Trees recently wrote about a study in nearby Baltimore that found that just a 10% increase in tree canopy was associated roughly with a 12% decrease in crime. And lastly, where there is shade that reduces heat islands or concrete deserts, there is a huge drop in heat-related illness, which I'll get to again in just a minute. Other human health benefits are better fitness. Humans are measurably more active outside where there's shade, which ultimately reduces our health costs. There's less stress. We've recently learned that during the pandemic, more and more people found solace outdoors in our shady green spaces. That's because trees can help to interrupt thought patterns that lead to anxiety or depression. And there's more socialization. We know from our park usage that humans find a sense of community by interacting with friends and families in those spaces. And again, what about heat illnesses? A little more. We've heard recently a study from the Science Museum of Virginia that found a 16-degree temperature difference between higher canopy neighborhoods in Richmond and those with less tree canopy. They found that these heat island areas, correlated to increased hospital visits for heat-related illnesses. Thus, where there is more shade and less impermeable surface, there are fewer heat stress illnesses. So here are two photos from our trips across the globe, each one taken on a 100+ degree day, from locations in Montreal on the left and China on the right. Where would you have preferred to be on that 100-degree day? Ecosystem benefits of trees include, of course, providing shelter for mammals and insects and birds, but also providing a healthy food chain. The food chain is a balance of mammals and birds, insects, fungi, ground-level native plants, woody shrubs, and understory and overstory trees. Our native trees are the capstone species of the food chain, hosting insects that feed our local and migratory birds and our small animal populations. If we can link small fragments of our urban forest ecosystems together, we may be able to achieve ecologist Doug Tallamy's dream of a homegrown national park. He envisions a connected network of our backyards and parklands in suburban and urban areas like our counties that could together create natural spaces and ecological corridors just as valuable to wildlife and larger than our federally designated national parks. So while we focus in this presentation on maintaining and growing a healthy urban forest and the policies that help do that, note that process can also benefit from the decomposition of a dead tree. The habitat of food and shelter it provides is critical for the survival of birds, insects, and small mammals. And in places where these snags of dead trees can safely exist without any danger to surrounding trails or human infrastructure, for example, in stream restorations, they should be preserved. So let's take a quick look at Fairfax County's current urban forest data as analyzed by the Chesapeake Bay program in 2021. I want to note here that the data that is used in this analysis is from 2018, so 5 years ago. The report showed that Fairfax County has 55.4% tree cover. It also showed there was a net loss of 737 acres of tree canopy between the years of 2014 and 2018. A prior analysis to that, based on 2015 data, showed that Fairfax County had 57% tree canopy. Of course, the methods of gathering data, tree data, have improved since 2015, and there are some folks that argue it is hard to accurately compare that data to 2018 data. But there are some takeaways. The report shows that the county has had a measurable loss of tree canopy, measured in acres, and that's not insignificant for the date that it was measured. Because the data is 5 years old, it does not cover the incredible growth of development in the county that we witnessed during the years of the pandemic. And any loss at all measured in 2018 means we are likely falling behind the CCAP recommended target of a 60% canopy in all of the averaging in the county in 2030, including a 40% measurement of tree canopy in all districts. And those would be our districts that right now have a significantly lower tree canopy than that. There will, however, be a new Fairfax County tree canopy analysis published soon, so we can all keep our eyes open for that. Let's review some of the threats to our trees that we see here in the county. We know that land use decisions, climate change, invasive vines and other pests, and poor consumer information are challenges to our fragile urban forest. There are limitations to our current land use policies. Those of you who live in Fairfax County have seen old houses on small lots torn down and huge new homes built instead. This is called infill development, and usually happens on a lot where the homeowner must have a tree conservation plan approved by the county before that homeowner can build. This requires that a certain percentage of the tree canopy must be saved or replaced by new tree plantings. Even when a plan has followed county rules, disaster can ensue at various points in the process. Here, we can see an infill project which had a tree conservation plan showing 30% of the lot should have tree canopy coverage in 10 years. The plan still allowed 11 healthy, mature trees to be removed. On the left, you can see those trees that were logged on the ground. However, when a homeowner gets a residential occupancy permit, any remaining mature trees that are part of the plan can be removed by right. There are currently no penalties for removal of such trees, even if it will mean that the approved tree conservation plan has failed. And removal of almost every tree is what happened in the photo on the right. The arrows point to the same location of 2 trees in each photo that was taken from the same vantage point. And that was our house. And that is our neighbor's house. So while that is a story about a really disheartening tree removal, other projects are more nuanced. Sometimes decisions are less obvious until you dig into the details. The North Hill development in the Franconia district is a good example of something that may appear one way at first. You'll see the large forest of about 21 to 24 acres on the left, and on the right, development and a much smaller 12-acre parcel of what is now accessible forest area. And Renee will dive into this land use case in more detail a little bit later. But it's an example of what we hope that in this series, you will grow as advocates, not only for trees, but also for smart land use. Two goals which can sometimes feel at odds with one another. When conflicts arise with natural resources, we are both, Renee and I, going to urge you to dig into the details and evaluate all the aspects of a plan before making a decision. Then there are threats to trees from climate change. The unpredictable changes in weather have brought periods of drought and heavy rains to formerly very temperate climate zones. The result of these global warming changes is that our planting zones are also changing. Trees that like cooler temperatures, such as maples or firs, are struggling to survive in zones that are now hotter and drier. Pests migrate north as the climate warms, and they cause huge damage, as has happened with the pine borer in Colorado and Montana. Trees cannot migrate to northern latitudes or up mountains very fast, and thus many mature trees are no longer healthy or resilient enough to survive where they have formerly thrived for eons. There are also threats, you've all seen them, from invasive non-native vines. English ivy, porcelain berry, wintergreen, oriental wisterias, oriental bittersweet, and kudzu are some of the vines that grow around and choke tree trunks or grow over the tops, inhibiting photosynthesis. When that tree eventually dies, it becomes a danger to surrounding human infrastructure. A note on technology. Our technology doesn't exist yet to easily see invasives on imagery, but it's coming. So in the meanwhile, we are estimating on the ground what is in danger by counting trees by surveying and counting trees per acre. The Plant Nova Trees project has surveyed about 70,000 acres of non-residential property in the county and estimates 7 to 8 trees are at risk on each acre. And there's a whole lot left that hasn't been eyeballed or counted. We will certainly at this rate lose canopy faster than we have plans to replace it. Each large shade tree is decades in the making. So we need to start now with native tree replacements that will be maintained to prevent invasive overruns. And there are threats from budgeting and staffing deficits. Threats to the urban forest, these are great topics where a lot of advocates are working to find solutions. So, for example, funding for invasives management and tree restoration planting has usually been on a year-to-year grant-style basis, which is not a stable and consistent funding model. In terms of increasing planting in vulnerable communities, for example, we need funding and more bilingual staff to work on outreach and programs in those areas. Our One Fairfax policy requires us to look at tree equity, and in our county, it is widely disparate. There are tools to assess tree equity, and they should be used to help prioritize planting and preservation projects in areas where there is less than a 40% tree canopy coverage. In 2021, Fairfax County staff put together a map showing the intersection of the tree canopy coverage that we knew at the time and populations with the highest vulnerabilities based on various social and economic index factors. The dark blue shows the highest areas of need. That is where the lowest tree canopy coverage meets the district or the area or the census tract with the highest vulnerability. So this is a tool that county agencies use to make One Fairfax decisions. Here's another equity assessment tool funded by American Forests. It's called the Tree Equity Score Assessment, often called, well, I've never heard it actually called by its short form. It's either TESA or TISA. This interactive tool looks at a variety of equity-related data in conjunction with tree canopy coverage in urbanized areas. We're going to share the link with you as part of the resources, and you can put in your address and play around with it. This screen capture shows the Merrifield area near my home with a snapshot report showing only a 29% tree canopy. Then there are threats from misinformation. These are some typical myths about trees. Trees are dangerous. Well, certainly, trees can be at risk from rising storms and drought conditions, but the risk has been over-magnified. For example, between 1995 and 2007, 500,000 people lost their lives in car accidents in the United States. And in the same period of time, 407 people were killed by trees in storm-related accidents. But to keep even those 407 number low, we of course must treat trees with great respect and good arborist care to reduce the chance of injury to people or property. Trees are too big to plant near your homes or your utilities. Well, Casey Trees, if you know of them, we've got that listed on your resource sheet as well. Casey Trees notes that big, healthy, overstory trees are safer for most house lots and utility lines than are smaller trees. Trees mess up our lawns. Well, we know that monocultures, that is one species of lawns, do not help a healthy ecosystem. So we need to mulch our leaves and spread the leaves instead of fertilizer and convert more lawn into low-to-the-ground mid-species of native plants. And then trees won't mess up our lawns anymore. In summary, knowing the many benefits of trees and also the major threats to our urban forest means we know more about what we can do to save, improve, and expand the urban forest. The more we know, the more the planet and all living creatures will benefit. So let's pause here and hear from you in the chat box. Renee, you want to ask the question?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Cindy's been talking, in regards to this set of trainings and what we're going to be learning, what are your thoughts so far? What has it sparked for you? I did see already a message in the chat box about working on tree canopy in Vienna, which is great. Just drop it in the chat box. Drop your thoughts so we can see what you're thinking. And as you're doing that, we'll move forward as well. So my next step is to build on what Cindy just presented, which probably you knew a lot of or components of, the benefits and the threats to trees. So what can we actually do about this? Ultimately, the most powerful thing you can do is connect with your decision makers. And you're all here because you wanted to train to be a Fairfax County tree policy advocate. So that's great. The word democracy comes from the Greek words demos, meaning people, and kratos, meaning power. So democracy can be thought of as power for the people. And being a community leader like you are here, being here, getting trained, bringing others along with you in your advocacy, it's a powerful way to influence government. You can take small steps now, bigger steps later as you gain more confidence, but it's very clear that we need strong action as we address this current climate crisis. So what to remember? Decision makers are people just like you. You vote for them and they work for you. Your constituent voice really matters in that way as well. And when you gather many voices in support of a cause, that can be really useful. I will also say it's not always that those who speak the loudest get their way, because decision makers have to listen to constituents, but they also must take into consideration the many laws and policies that are out there. They also should be taking into consideration the needs of those unable to make a seat at the table, such as under-resourced communities. And taking all this into consideration, the best constructive feedback that you can give encompasses not only your message with ideas that overlap with what a decision maker might be thinking about, but the policies and such behind that as well. That can be really the most powerful and persuasive. We know this approach has worked. The screenshot here is from a meeting last year when we met with Supervisor Alcorn and asking him to support more funds for Fairfax County Park Authority. We brought along 2 constituents, each who told really wonderful personal stories about their connections to parks and why that additional funding was important. And they leaned on us to do the advocacy partners to analyze the budget details and make suggestions of what the asks might be. And that year, this past year, we got one-time funds of $400,000 for bamboo removal and $500,000 for addressing the backlog of forestry issues in FCPA. The year prior, we did a similar advocacy push, and we got $752,000 of recurring funding for 3 staff positions to start up a natural resources sustainability initiative at the parks. So this works, in short. So who are the decision makers? This might be federal, state, local, it really matters what kind of policy you're looking to push. In these set of trainings, we're focused on Fairfax County. A lot of this advocacy work can be applied anywhere, your HOA, your faith community, your at the state level as well. But for these purposes, we'll be diving into the weeds of Fairfax County. So in Fairfax County, who are the decision makers? We've got 9 districts. You live in one of them if you live in the county. And for land use decisions, there are 2 primary bodies of decision makers. The Planning Commission, who you have a representative if you live in Fairfax County. One of them is your district representative. They make recommendations to the Board of Supervisors about land use decisions, and the Board of Supervisors make those decisions. So you can see the layout here. We already shared the link to find your reps. That's a great way to know who to talk to when you have questions or suggestions. And this is very quick. We're going to cover some of this stuff again in a bit more detail in December and January trainings, because knowing your audience for who you're writing to or speaking to is a key part of what we do as advocates for, talking about trees and smart development. So when we're thinking about the advice of providing that constructive feedback to decision makers as we advocate for the value of trees in addressing the climate crisis, I think of it as like 2 buckets of guidance that decision makers have in the back of their minds when you're talking to them. The first is, what is the law, which is an ordinance, is what a local law is called. And then what are the county policies? They're more pie in the sky things, they're goals. So ordinances as laws, they are laws that decision makers must follow. And yes, I know I put that asterisk there, terribly obvious, because as you always hear, exceptions apply. The county often appreciates flexibility in how they implement various ordinances. And so it's as powerful as some of our ordinances might be. If exceptions are granted maybe too often, those protections can be weakened. But I will say part of our advocacy is to be aware of those exceptions, ask for transparency about why or how they're being used, and push for the implementation of the strong, good ordinances that we do have. And then if you're having trouble sleeping, you can dive into the county code and read these ordinances, hours of endless nighttime reading. I've listed a couple here that deal with trees and natural resources. I will just say this, the stuff is complicated. You do not need to be an expert on it. It can be helpful to be aware of what's out there. And you can find what you're interested in and dive in further. Or if you find that you're not as interested as you thought, don't worry about it. The best thing is that you can partner with organizations like Nature Forward and us and Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions, like you're doing tonight, to learn the ropes or to have us kind of point to the things that we've learned. Tonight is just an introduction. These links to all the code will be in the resources, the resource document that we've shared, and that we'll share with you again via email. And then in terms of guidance for decision makers, in terms of policy, these are, again, the goals and kind of the aspirations of the county. The policy plan is maybe the most technical and overarching guidance. It has chapters pertaining to everything: land use, transportation, housing, environment, economic development, a lot of others. And the others that we listed here are samples that are also relevant guidance to trees and natural resources. It's not all of them, but it's most of them. And then Cindy already mentioned this, but a particular note is the One Fairfax policy, which is the joint racial and social equity policy for the county. And as we think about advocating for the value of trees in addressing the climate crisis, we consider how trees can benefit those most affected by and most unable to mitigate the impacts of climate change, particularly as it applies to human health, as Cindy covered. So I'll reiterate again, you don't have to be an expert in this. We have the cheat sheet of links for you, so it's just as an FYI. So after all that wonky policy stuff, that's kind of the what. I want to come back to that so what. That constructive feedback that you'll be giving to decision makers, it's really great if you are knowledgeable enough to know the value of trees in addressing the climate crisis, like Cindy covered, know what's important to your decision maker. So you might have to dig on that a little bit and get to know them, what they've thought about in the past or said in the past. which also partners like us can help you with. And then what the county ordinances and policies are, so that you have a good base to kind of bring all those things together when you tell your own story and you have talking points for advocating for trees. I think it's in that way that you can really connect best with decision makers, frame the benefits that resonate with them. So Cindy mentioned this example at North Hill. She mentioned it can be more nuanced. And I think a really good way to solidify some of what we presented tonight is give you a quick overview of a land use case example that on paper looks a little scary. This is in Franconia District where I live. It's along the Route 1 corridor. And frankly, it was hard to see. It was hard to see happening. That, we know, what Cindy just covered, all of the benefits that all of those trees were giving to our environment and to this urbanized area. We know that we've lost them now being cut down. But as we think about addressing the climate crisis, it's really important, we think, to keep in mind that trees are a component of the solution, but there are many ways we can and must fight back against reducing carbon emissions. So for context, the little red circle here is where on the Route 1 corridor, North Hill is located. It's 1 mile east of Huntley Meadows Park. We should all be so lucky to live that close to Huntley Meadows. It's on the Route 1 corridor. This has been slated for a big redevelopment through the Embark Comprehensive Plan Amendment, which passed several years ago. Redevelopment is coming to this area. Density is coming to this area. It's going to include a bus rapid transit system, which will connect to the Huntington Metro just 3 miles north of North Hill, where that little red circle is. And you can think of a bus rapid transit system as like a cheap metro, by bus. And so while redevelopment overall raises concerns of gentrification, displacement of residents living in affordable communities today, the redevelopment also can come with potential positives such as building densely, which can help minimize sprawl and provide additional housing that we do need, take that opportunity to make things more walkable, bikeable, and in this case, improve stormwater controls, because this area was all built out before stormwater controls were legislated. Now they're required as of the 70s, but that wasn't the case back then. While that initial comparison photo I showed you looked like 33 acres of forest, it also wasn't always like that. It was developed in the 80s and 90s as a mobile home community. You can see right there in the center of your screen. It still has trees, but there's a lot of people that were living there. That was dismantled in the 90s. This is imagery from 2009. And the forest has begun to fill in again. And I think, a lot of us just kind of took it for granted. We kind of thought it was always a forest. But it's important to remember this isn't something like an old growth forest that hadn't been touched in hundreds of years. It still has had human impacts. So I want to mention that the imagery on the right is a little bit old, maybe a year old. That development is done now, or at least it's certainly open and for business in much of it. And so, like we mentioned, what each of us as tree advocates might seem heartbreaking for that loss of, I think it was a 33-acre lot before. So we've lost, about 20 acres or so of land, of trees. It can be hard, but this is a bigger picture win in terms of climate change. At Nature Forward, we do not advocate for saving every tree every time. We approach our advocacy more holistically and with more nuance. In this development, all of the buildings with the white roofs, they are all affordable housing units and senior living apartments. 216 affordable family units for people making 30% or 60% of the area median income. That's about $30,000 to $60,000 for a single family household. So what we've seen here is that we have made it so that we don't have as much sprawl. People who are living here can move into these affordable places, also senior living. Also, market rate townhomes, better use of land than single family homes, build densely. And that park, that 33-acre forested area, did not have trails before. It was not really publicly accessible, privately owned. That 12-acre park is public, is going to have trails, and will be a place of solace now for people. And then right out front, bus rapid transit. That's great. If you haven't read about how housing policy is climate policy, I really encourage you to do so. I put a link to a blog post we did about it a while back, this past February. But in short, the more housing we have close to where people work and near public transit, the less reliant people are on cars, and emissions can be drastically reduced. And America's single family home zoning, much of it rooted in racism, is a significant contributor to carbon emissions because it's so car oriented. So while on the surface we see this significant forest loss, this development comes with a significant number of human and climate benefits that are really worth advocating for. These are pictures from North Hill just this week as I was down in that area. I'll say this, there's always room, even for really good developments like this, to advocate for more. And that's where you come in, to think about these development projects, work with partners like us. We're going to, through these trainings and through partnership, we can make you aware of the kind of things that you can be advocating for. These trees, they might not all make it. I definitely saw 1 or 2 dead ones there. We can be speaking up to say, come replace these trees, report these things. We can advocate at the time of development to get native species put in. There are every development that is going through a rezoning or something, the special exception process, they almost always have proffers. A proffer is a voluntary commitment from a developer to reduce or eliminate the impact of new development on the neighboring properties of the county. This is an opportunity for us to tell our decision makers that we want, to push for additional things. It's where the additional flexibility comes in. You can ask to not grant an exception that might have been thought about. You can ask for other things they weren't thinking of, like bird safe windows or requiring native plantings whenever feasible. We can be asking for restrictions if it's a homeowners association that will be built as part of the development, having their bylaws right in to not allow invasive plants to be planted. There are so many opportunities for extra advocacy to make every good project even better. So what are we thinking about in Fairfax County? A couple things on the horizon that we're keeping an eye on, and that hopefully as you're thinking about becoming an advocate yourself, that you'll help us with. So the first big thing is that the policy plan of Fairfax County is getting updated. Staff has been working on this for this year. They started in January. This policy plan was first published in 1990, 33 years ago. They've made some updates as recently as 2017, but even that was 6 years ago. And the chance of opening up this document could strengthen it, which is so exciting, but it also always has the opportunity to weaken it. So we want to be sure that trees, natural resources, and their role in addressing the climate crisis are in this narrative. Again, this is a policy document, guidance only, but it's an important document for sure. Second, in terms of broader thinking, the yearly budget for Fairfax County is another great time to think about where we can get more money to help support some of these things like Resilient Fairfax, so the community-wide climate and energy CCAP, community-wide climate energy action plan. So that's coming up in March and April. We'll be preparing for that. We're going to be doing another big push for helping to fund Fairfax County parks, as we've been doing for the past 2 years. In terms of specific things coming up, Cindy mentioned the new tree canopy analysis. We've heard inklings that the new analysis shows that we're increasing in tree canopy. That would be great if that was true. From all the news and partners that we've talked with, and we talk with a lot through the Virginia Conservation Network, which is a statewide partnership, we've heard that would seem difficult to believe in this day and age. So we want to keep an eye on it. We want to keep an open mind. But one thing that we're not going to have as part of this tree canopy analysis is the use of LiDAR, which is really high resolution. It can tell shrubs from trees where the current data cannot. But that, I think, is by the U.S. Geological Survey, and it only comes out every 5 years, I believe, because they need clear access, clear skies. So it does take a while to get that information, to take those photos. But if we can advocate for adding LiDAR to this analysis, that would give us an even, no pun intended, clearer picture of our tree canopy. And then landscaping and screening ordinance. Again, this is getting into the weeds, but this ordinance is what dictates what kind of trees or how many trees might be planted in a parking lot that might be developed, or screening between communities or between businesses. So advocating for positive change there is also something we can do. That's what we have for tonight. Again, just recapping that next up, we're going to be talking with Citizens Climate Lobby to think about how best to execute on having one-on-one meetings with your decision makers. And we have all these other great meetings coming up as well that will help prepare you to actually do the advocacy that we just talked about, could be possible. So with that, thank you for coming. You have our email addresses here. Christine will also drop them in the chat box. If we don't get to cover your question tonight, or you have a question that comes up later, email us and we'll do our best to answer it. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that everyone can raise their hand, put their question in the chat box, and I'm going to hand it over to Christine to help us take us through any Q&A that might be out there, or you can use a little raise hand feature in Zoom if you want to ask your question live.
Thank you so much, Renee and Cindy. That was great. Just a reminder to everybody that's here that we'll be sending out the resources that were mentioned in a follow-up email, and this recording will also be available to all those who registered for the trainings. If you have questions on either Cindy's or Renee's presentation, please either put the question in the chat if you prefer that I read it, or you can just speak up. We can be informal. However you'd like to ask your question. We do have a comment in the chat from John, and it says, why can stormwater engineers bulldoze a resource protection area to widen a narrow, safe road? Renee, do you know why?
I will say this, transportation projects get a lot of exemptions from a lot of the good ordinances we have. And road widenings are the most maddening of them, because we shouldn't really be widening our roads when they're not needed. If it's a safe road, they might have data that says something different. Standards change over time, so an old road might now not fit new standards. It's hard to say exactly why a road might be slated for something, but this is, again, you can advocate to your local decision makers. VDOT can be a challenge because we have the Fairfax County Department of Transportation, and they can help try to influence VDOT, but they don't always have that power. John, go ahead.
Yeah, this is a road that is 70 years old. It's gravel. It's 9 to 15 feet wide. It serves two residences.
Oh, I have heard of this case. Yes.
Yeah, Hickory Hollow Lane.
Yes.
And they want to widen it and clear out 70 mature trees that are next to the road. There's never been an accident on this road in 70 years. There's two residences.
We just want to know what we can do to get them to stop. Is there a way?
It's a good question. Maybe you've already done these things. These all might seem very obvious, and you might have exhausted the things that you think you can do, but always talk to affected landowners, get their perspectives. If they disagree with the point of view that you have, understand and listen why, because there might be things to glean to find common ground on how to move forward. If you're all united and have the same perspective, then going to your elected official in that area would certainly be the right thing to do.
Yeah, they rate this road at 48 vehicle trips per day, which is a lie. There are more like 4 to 8 trips a day from these two residents, but there are probably 50 to 75 dog walkers, joggers, birders, people out for exercise that use this road daily. So, and yes, we are trying to work with our supervisor.
And you can always go up to the state level too, and find your state representatives as well.
Hey,
and discuss with them.
I've written to Jerry Conley 3 times. I haven't even got acknowledgement that he got my message.
Well, he's federal, so maybe start with your state rep as well. I know he's local, but
Yeah. Yeah,
but I think it sounds like you're doing all the right things, but feel free to email us offline, and
Absolutely.
that does sound like a really, really challenging. I read a news article about that, or someone had sent information.
in the Post. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Good luck on helping to save those trees. Sylvia asked when the new tree canopy analysis is scheduled. They have it, so far as I can tell, and they're just getting it ready for release. We don't have a date, but I think we've been told before the end of the year. Is that right, Cindy? Yeah.
Let's see, any other questions? Feel free to raise your hand, unmute. Otherwise, those look like all the questions.
did see somebody mention.
Does it
Shirley Gate-
make any sense to go to the state delegates or senators on these issues? It just seems like we're living right by Rolling Road where they're cutting trees down every day because they can widen the road, which nobody in my development wanted, because now they'll go 50 miles per hour instead of 40, which in 30-mile-per-hour zone. So it just seems like there's so many trees that are cut down because of road widening and new roads. And is there a way to do that differently? I mean, why do they have to cut everything down? Why can't they leave some of them there?
It's a really challenging question. VDOT, the Virginia Department of Transportation, they have goals called level of service. And those levels of service are specifically car oriented. It can be a challenge to get levels of service to mean public transit, biking, walking. And because of that, their structure over time lends itself to road widenings. And it's something that lots of organizations are working on. Coalition for Smarter Growth is a great organization to think about combating road widenings. Anyone who's driven up 495 to Maryland has seen how many trees have come down to put in not metro, not bus rapid transit, but paid toll lanes. That's an equity issue, if nothing else.
Right.
Those who can afford it can now go faster. So Judy, we share the frustration with VDOT, and you might know if you go to like Arlington or Alexandria, you might see all this great infrastructure. Walkways are marked, bike lanes are painted. It's incredible because they own their roads. So those counties and cities own their roads. Fairfax County does not own our roads. VDOT does.
Okay.
There are only 2 counties in the state of Virginia, Henrico near Richmond and Arlington, that own their own roads, and then cities, I guess, are also separate. If you ask the question, can Fairfax County own our roads? You will just be laughed out of the room. No one will tell you why. Money is the reason. I read it's very expensive.
Yeah.
But it could also allow us the autonomy to make safer decisions that have different goals out of those roads.
Right.
Thank you, Judy, so much. Mary Glass has a comment: as stream restoration projects are unnecessarily removing trees from CB credits because this is the cheapest source, but the water quality benefits are not monitored and proven. Advocacy for changes in CB policies need to be considered. Do we have any thoughts on that?
Nature Forward has worked with the Choose Clean Water Coalition to really look at stream restorations. If you've seen an incised stream, you know that trees will be lost if you do nothing because it's erosion. The banks fall in and trees will eventually be lost. And you send all that sediment downstream if you do nothing. We tried to look at each project to try to evaluate the benefits and drawbacks and try to, similar to tree loss, not be all for and not be all against, but look at it on a case-by-case basis. It again is hard. If you have a stream restoration going on in your backyard, like I do, you face that reality very quickly, but you can step up and advocate. So I stepped up and said, you've got to treat that porcelain berry that is right next to where you're doing it. Oh, that's outside of the limits of disturbance. Yes, I know, but it is going to drop all of that porcelain berry seed bank into that area. And they did, right? Because I connected with the right people. I asked some questions. I made a good argument. I'm an IMA site leader, so I do this by hand, and I really would have liked their help to not spread it further when they make all that disturbance in that area. So to think critically about how you can affect a stream restoration positively if one is moving forward, I think is a good thought. But hopefully everyone can take a balanced approach to that as well.
Okay, we have
I'm going to just add one little thing to that I've learned is that stream restoration planning and then the contracting out for the work happens 5 or 6 years ahead of when we start seeing the work in our local streams. And so if that plan, I have learned, was designed around sort of older ideas and older technology, and a lot of things have changed in stream restoration planning over the last 5 or 6 years, then it might be worth talking to your district supervisor to see if some accommodations can be made for applying newer ideas and newer technology. So it becomes an interesting sort of agency procurement contracting issue when we really think it's just about trees. It's very interesting. But the more you know, have a relationship with your district supervisor, the more you'll understand about the stream restorations going on in your district and how they feel about it.
Thank
So,
you, Cindy.
yeah.
Brett asks, do we know how the county will explain the new canopy analysis? For example, if canopy hasn't changed, what is the reason? Who wants to take that?
I'll take it. That's an excellent question, Brett. And my guess is that it's why we probably haven't seen they're looking at various things that might be of interest in the data and how to explain them. And the original contractor also has to explain to the county what they've seen in the data. So we have no idea what's coming out, but I think that the fact that it didn't come out last month and it may not come out until next month means some of those issues are being addressed.
Okay, Lisa, one thing I found in our neighborhood is that the RPAs were changed a number of years ago, and people who have yards or part of yards in an RPA don't know. Our neighborhood's yard is almost all in RPA, and last year he cut down 6 huge mature trees. I'm so sorry. I found out about our yard when we replaced our deck. We didn't have to cut down any trees, so it didn't affect us. And we have since converted our yard to mostly natives. That's awesome. But I wonder how people are notified of changes to their RPA.
I will say that our real estate law is interesting in Virginia. When you buy a house, you're not told that you're in an RPA, which is really eye-opening, that isn't disclosed. And so, Lisa, advocacy, you don't have to just talk to decision makers, you can talk to neighbors too, pass out flyers. You can find RPA maps on the county website, print them out and deliver it to people and tell them you'll be there to answer questions or connect them with people. That's a very hands-on approach, but it's a great question. I mean, it's really, that transparency is really hard. Cindy, do you know about RPAs, and is there any notification process for that? I don't think so.
Oh, you're on mute, Cindy.
I was just mimicking Renee. I don't think so, but that's certainly discoverable, and it's an excellent question.
And John, great call out on acronyms. The one thing you'll find out about advocacy is that you will be slaughtered by acronyms. So stop anybody who uses an acronym that somebody don't understand. RPA is a resource protection area. This is the measurement of 100 feet away from any stream on either side. It does not matter if that's been built on, if that has pavement on it from before RPAs were designated, but that is the 100-foot buffer. With newer laws, you can't build in that area without an exception, and there might be reasons to have exceptions, but that is a generally protected area, except for things like John highlighted, like transportation projects and other exceptions. But when you see things in the county, Lisa, one thing to note is that a lot of our enforcement of our ordinances is a complaint-based system, which I complain about, ironically. But if you see something, say something, reach out to someone at the county to report it. John, you have a question.
Yeah, about sometime this summer, we got a postcard, glitzy, shiny postcard from one of the county agencies saying that they were aware that we are now partly in an RPA. And it read us the rules saying that you can't do anything without a permit. You can't cut anything down, including invasives, which kind of surprised me, that you need a permit to cut a porcelain berry vine. So, but the road people don't don't have to get a permit.
That's encouraging to hear that you got any notification on that. That's
Yeah.
great to hear.
Yeah.
That's new information to me.
We
Uh,
got
if-
this, and the RPA line on the maps, on the stormwater and RPA county maps, they changed about 5 years ago, which brought us within that RPA. Because it
Interesting.
was previously not, it was previously out. So,
I know we're at time and we do want to be respectful of your time. To close up, I'll just quickly address Lisa's question, which is there something that can be retroactively done? I would just always talk to somebody, call someone at the county and ask them what you can do, what you should do when it happens. Maybe you can't do anything now, but every chance to talk to a county enforcer is a chance to learn more. So I would encourage that. It might be too late to do something this after the fact. Can you email me after this meeting? And I will do my best to track down who at the county you should call for that.
Great. Thank you, Cindy and Renee, and all those who came, and we'll be sending out reminders of the next training session. Thank you so much.
Great. We'll see you on November 9th.
Thank you all for attending.